Hmm? Huh? Give me any points. Alright everybody, welcome back to Articulated Points. This is our Cobra Convergence 7 special. And today we're going to be looking at the Infiltrate Cobra Island set that ultimately was never produced. With me today is my partner in crime, Patrick. Patrick, you've already been on Cobra Convergence with full force, but, you know, doing double duty here. How's it feel?
This is only our third time doing this, but I always really look forward to it. And we keep trying hard to put out good quality content and saving some good stuff specifically for Cobra Convergence, right?
Yeah. I mean, we do our best. We do what we can.
Yeah, well, looking at some of the stuff that didn't come out is always, in my opinion, that's the stuff that I really enjoy, is revisiting things that don't normally get revisited because they never were for sale.
And speaking of, let's just jump right into it and get the show on the road, huh?
Sure. And I really want to just set the stage for where our minds were at the time that this was going to come out. Now, as of 2003, if you think about what Crimson Guards were already available, you really only have the original 82 through 94 run. There wasn't anything Crimson Guard related released for the Toys R Us 97-98, and there was nothing released in the Real American Hero collection. And so there was a lot of hype behind this 3-pack.
Yeah, and if you want to be even more technical, you couldn't get Crimson Guards outside of 85 to 93, so it was an even smaller window than just that original Real American Hero run. I remember people getting excited over Cobra Claws in 2002 because people were thinking that might have been a successor to the Crimson Guard at the time, because that's how starved for Steegies we were.
Yeah, and the Claws Commander really even has a nice Crimson Guard vibe to him. I'm just going to mention what the set was. It was first revealed at JoeCon, which was in June 26th through 29th of 2003. I'm trying to put my dates in here so everybody can kind of keep track of the time frame across this episode.
I promise you he's not trying to make you feel old.
Right, well, yeah, if anything, I'll make myself feel old. But yeah, end of June 2003, at JoeCon, they revealed a 3-pack. It was going to be called Infiltrate Cobra Island, and it was a Crimson Guard 3-pack. But if you looked at it, you could clearly tell that none of them were Crimson Guards. They were all G.I.Joe members in disguise. It had an approximate retail price of $9.99. So for $10, 3 brand new Crimson Guards right after the drought of no Crimson Guards. But the other information on that tag is very important. And it indicated that it was a Market 6 exclusive and that they should be available sometime around November of 2003, so later that year. Now, do you remember what Market 6 is?
That is sort of like the non-prominent retailers, like Dollar General, that you would find. So not your Targets, not your Walmarts, not your Toys R Us.
Targets, Walmarts, Toys R Us. You named 3 of the 5, because the reason why it's called Market 6 is they count the 5 major ones and then just say, and everybody else, and it was being referred to as Market 6.
And the rest.
Yeah, and it's probably not, like, people are like, well, one of the two is going to be Amazon. No, it was KB and Kmart were the other two, which means that internet retailers were going to have a shot at it, but e-commerce at the time was very much still new.
Yeah, in fact, at that time, Toys R Us's online sales were being handled by Amazon. That's how little they thought of it. They weren't even in control of their own online stock.
Yeah, so the figures that were put together, the ones that were shown at JoeCon, very clearly were hand-painted samples where they had taken either test shots or existing bodies and repainted them. One of them would be Duke, and then there's Snake Eyes and Gung Ho.
I'd point out from this JoeCon reveal, you might not guess that's Duke, because that's Thunder's head.
Yeah, it's a little weird that they chose Thunder's head, because Thunder's head is a side-to-side head, And the Crimson Guard body is a ball-jointed one. So they would have really had to have adapted things in order to use the Thunderhead.
I mean, it's the same issue with Snake Eyes. They use the version 1 head, which is also a rotational joint instead of a ball joint.
Also included in the set is a raft, and if the raft looks familiar, that's because it's the exact same one that was included with the G.I. Joe Action Marine from 1994. And I do mean the exact same one.
They probably just popped one out of storage and placed it there.
That's really what it looks like, yes.
I get with the Action Marine, that was considered part of his accessories because it was made out of the 2 weapons trees he had, but just look at the value of that. 3 figures plus a small vehicle for $10. You had it so good back then.
Yeah. I do want to point out, though, that they don't have Cobra logos on them. And at the time, there was a rumor that they were not going to have Cobra logos on them because they were G.I. Joes in disguise.
Well, the reason I never really believed that is because we were in the midst of spy troops at this time, and there were plenty of G.I. Joe figures putting on disguises that had Cobra logos on them. So I just figured that was a detail they didn't want to hand paint on there.
Yeah, that's also quite possible. In this picture, all the characters are carrying the rifle from 2003 Tunnel Rat. And I do want to note, Gung-Ho and Duke are using the upper arms from Ninja Force Storm Shadow and the forearms of DEF Shockwave, while Snake Eyes is using the arms from Firefly.
Maybe they just wanted to give him that knife detail, give him a little extra ninja weaponry, perhaps.
And then I actually found that in July, online orders did start to be taken. You can look back at Joe Sightings and see that they have a list here, and both of these are the internet lists of GIJoeForSale.com and G.I. Joe HQ. But I also wanted to mention that around this time, that would have been when the order period would have started for a related item, which is the Agent Faces mail-in. Now, we're not going to get too much into the Agent Faces mail-in because Peg Warmers is doing a Cobra Convergence video. So go ahead and take a look back for the Agent Faces mail-away topic that they have going on. So that's also in Cobra Convergence. We could just kind of skip it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did want to mention, though, before we move on, that the advertisement for the Agent Faces figure did not have a Cobra logo.
And again, I think that was fueling conspiracy theories at the time, rather than they just didn't want to draw it.
July was when our orders started happening. August was Agent Faces. And in September, the delays started to occur. Corey Stinson from SmallJoes.com had made a post letting people know, "Sorry folks, I was informed by Hasbro Sales a couple days ago that this item has been delayed into early 2004 due to insufficient retail orders at this time. They're hoping to have enough orders in place, closer to whenever their target is, by the end of the year. If any aspect of this is incorrect, Daryl D. Priest, please correct me."
I think that's when the first strand of worry started forming in my head about this thing. Because at that point, we really hadn't gotten delays on products unless they became outright canceled. Or by some miracle came back, like that last wave of the Real American Hero collection that turned out to be online only.
So, also during these delays, a couple other things had happened. The Spy Troops, the movie, aired on the Cartoon Network in September, and Agent Faces is in it, but the characters who also appear in the Crimson Guard uniforms in the 3-pack, none of them do that in the movie. And then in November, that's when our Agent Faces started to ship, and that was when this stuff was supposed to hit, but did not.
And I remember feeling really sad about that, because I was looking forward to that set. I liked the idea of the Spy Troops actually looking like they're supposed to, because prior to that, the Spy Troops figures, you had clip-on armor, but you still saw like half the figures sticking through that disguise. With Faces, it was the one time you could put on that helmet and he looked like what he was supposed to look like.
Yeah, that's... Unless they were making up the Cobra, that it would be like the Raptor Vipers with barrel roll. And then I do want to point out that the big difference on Agent Faces is that he ended up having Duke upper arms and DEF Shockwave forearms. So those Shockwave forearms that were shown on the painted sample ended up on Agent Faces, but the shoulders were different.
Which I kind of do miss those other shoulder options because they looked more realistic, or lack of a better term on these action figures. I just think the Duke arms, it's a little too smooth at the bicep.
Well, it also looks like there's a short sleeve there for some reason.
Or they're wearing a weird ring.
In late November and early December 2003 then, word got around that the set was canceled in forum posts. It was kind of a quiet cancellation. I actually had trouble finding anything. You can see here, we already had G.I. Joe HQ in the example earlier, so I thought that I would look at that one. In October 2003, the set is listed as their #1 seller. And then in December 2003, it's nowhere on the list. Yeah. But that isn't the only place that we've heard of this set. There were a number of test shots that appeared online that made it into collectors' hands. Do you recall those?
Briefly, I was not in the prototype collecting community at the time, and I largely still am not, but people were sharing online in forums and news groups.
Yeah, I kind of was aware of the test shots. I didn't get like the first set that I saw or anything like that, but I did manage to get a set toward the end whenever they kind of started trailing off in price. And I can confirm that this raft, it most definitely is exactly the same as the Action Marine raft. I cannot tell any difference between the two. As a matter of fact, while the figures that I got are really clean and nice, this thing's kind of dusty and scuffed a little bit, as if it was part of overstock from Action Marine, and they just sort of tossed it in, confident that they could get this thing manufactured.
Wouldn't it be crazy if that was the reason it got canceled? They couldn't source enough rafts.
I don't know. That would have been really sad. I mean, I would have gladly paid $10 just for the 3 figures.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of differences on these figures that were not what we had seen. So you can kind of see the development that had gone on. The most notable of which is that they changed Duke's face to actually be Duke. That made a lot of sense.
That was one thing I was actually pretty happy about when those figures started showing up as prototypes, is that he actually had a Duke head and not a Thunder head. And like, oh, good. And they would have had to retool that because it actually had the ball neck.
It's the same sculpt as the original. As a matter of fact, on this figure, it's one of those ones that's really, really loose. Like, it feels like they needed to adjust it still to make it properly fit. But what doesn't need to be adjusted anymore to properly fit is Snake Eyes' head.
Ooh.
That thing is relatively nice. It's not too tight. It's not too loose. And they have taken the sculpt of the version 1 Snake Eyes head and put it on a ball joint.
Frankly, I'm surprised we didn't see that reused 17 other times in this era.
Yeah, we saw it reused 0 times. Like, they did all this work, and then they never used it. It's very strange.
And given that Snake Eyes showed up and felt like every other Toys R Us pack, and especially this head sculpt showing up again and again and again, you'd think they would have used the ball neck.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting about the particular set of test shots that I got is that Snake Eyes' right upper arm has a black marker X on it, as if to say, no, not this. And I think that's because of the fact that these are actually Saw Viper upper arms on this figure.
Which is an even weirder choice than Duke.
I mean, the weird thing is, we know that they had the Storm Shadow upper arms available. They had released them in the BJ's set, right?
And the Real American Hero collection.
I wonder if there was just something about the joints that were different, that were associated with that because of his ninja mechanism.
It was a later release in the vintage line, so maybe they were working off of 2 different bucks at that point, compared to the Crimson Guard line.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess we probably would need to pop some of these things apart and actually try putting them together to see how the engineering is on it. Also, on these test shots, there are no COO, the country of origin. In this era, they started putting them in the feet. Vintage G.I. Joes generally had them on the butt and inside the leg. But in this era, they started where they would make new tooling. They would put the date and the country of manufacturer in a concave area on the bottom of the feet. And these ones don't have that. And of course there is Gung Ho. I did want to point out that the Gung Ho that was shown at the convention and was shown in solicitation online, that one just reuses the head from the, 2000 Gung Ho? Or is it 2001?
I want to say 2001.
Yeah, it's just reused from that, but it is that specific flesh tone. And this was going to be that more pink flesh tone.
That's a pretty decent Gung Ho head sculpt, so I was happy they were going to go that route. But I was worried for a minute, they'd have a retooled swivel neck in there.
I think that this head works out because it has that bandana that actually looks like it would be of use underneath the Crimson Guard helmet.
A little protection on there.
Now, one of the things that has not appeared online is an EP set, an engineering pilot set, which would be painted samples. And as far as I know, this is the only set. The only thing that's a little bit weird is that there has been some debate online as to whether or not this set is legitimate. And so I really kind of want to show what it looks like and then dig in to see if we can figure out, what our thoughts are on that topic. Snake Eyes here is as you would imagine. He has the silver visor. I would note that the silver on it does look like it is the same kind of silver as what's on his chest and on his shoulders and on his wrists. Like I had pointed out, that Snake Eyes was originally going to have different arms, and he doesn't. We know that he wasn't ever going to end up with those Firefly arms just from the other test shots that have shown up that don't have the Firefly arms and have the same arms matching the other characters. So that doesn't make me question the Snake Eyes in this set really at all. Whenever I'm verifying the legitimacy of something, I like to look at what the paint masks looked like. Because the argument against these is that they may just be test shots that somebody hand-painted. And the word hand-painted, whenever it comes to G.I. Joes, it really requires some clarification for me, because in some ways, all G.I. Joes were hand-painted. They were popped into a mask and then sprayed by a single person. So does that count as hand-painted? Because if I'm making a custom at home, sometimes I mask off the pieces, right?
Sure. I guess it comes down to freehand painted, maybe?
Yep, and that is exactly the phrase that I was going to bring up. That I think that there's a difference between hand-painted and painted freehand. And if you are trying to make the distinction that one person sat down with all of the, we'll call them stencils, the paint masks, if they sat down with all of them and used all of them themselves, does that count as hand-painted? Or did you actually have to separate those out amongst many people on an assembly line? And, then it doesn't count as hand-painted. Like, what does that word even mean? It's a little weird to try to make that distinction. So for me, the main distinction is whether or not the paint masks were used or were not used.
And if you look at a lot of prototype pictures on like the back of packaging or in catalog, for example, you can easily tell they're hand painted because the lines aren't quite as straight as they should be. Faction logos are really primitively just kind of scribbled on there. It's pretty apparent, and like the paint will be pretty thick on the figure.
The thing that I'm really going to be focused on is the braid that is around the Crimson Guard's right shoulder, because if you look closely at the tip of it, you could see where the paint mask covered up a little bit of the sculpt. Maybe it should have been a little bit further over so it could be painted a little more brown.
Sort of that tassel end of the braid.
Yes, the tassel end of the braid. Very, very good way of phrasing it. This is the Duke figure, and I don't even know how I didn't mention this. The other major difference is that these figures don't have Cobra logos. So it begs the question, were they pulled from the process before the tampograph was put on? Or at this point of planning, there were no plans to ever put them on? But in my opinion, it is telling that none of them have Cobra logos. That's a little more evidence that these are indeed a sample of some kind.
Yeah, I don't know why you would take an existing Crimson Guard figure and then rub out the logo to try and make it match your fake.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been, if you were going to fake them, it would have been a lot easier to leave them on and still claim that they were real. But the big thing for me is still those shoulders. Looking at Duke, I did want to look at this head, because this head is clearly also not hand-painted. The top of his head kind of has a lot of smooth surfaces. It'd be really easy to see brushstrokes, but they're not there. He has the darker skin tone than the 2001 Duke. So this is not a head swap, not swapped with a 2001 Duke anyway. One of the possibilities that I thought it may be is that it could be swapped from the canceled 2003 Walmart Parachute Duke. But that seems like a lot of if, and I can't remember the exact timeline of when those showed up versus when these showed up. Do you remember?
No, I don't. But even then, there's only a small handful of those out there in the wild. to take one of those off your valuable prototype to make another prototype, it doesn't seem terribly likely.
And the shade of the brown is not, I have that Duke. The shade of the brown in his hair is not quite the same. It's very close, but it's not quite the same. Looking really closely at this gung-ho, I kind of do think that it's been hand-painted. Painted freehand, I should say. Because it does kind of look like there's some globby brush strokes inside the bandana. If you look under the bandana, you can almost see maybe where it was masked off and a bit of paint seeped underneath the tape. And then across his mustache, the surface bumps are painted, but down into the cracks where you would hit if you were spraying it, those areas are not painted very well. So it does look to me like the head of this gung-ho has been painted freehand. But there's still a lot of evidence to talk about on the figures other than that.
Yeah, the paint's a little bit globby, but I mean, we've seen retail releases where they can be kind of globby too.
Well, yeah, that is true. And the crazy thing is, this, I don't think, there are different stages of EP. There's like the engineering pilot, and then there's the final engineering pilot. I have seen figures that are weird, like there is a low light figure where his head is just completely a white test shot. So the fact that Gung-Ho's head from the same year in 2003 looks like it was finished by hand is certainly weird, but it doesn't rule out the possibility that this still is that set. It just kind of rules out the possibility that this would have been an FEP, which is a final engineering pilot, where they would have to prove all the parts of the process, including all of the masks for Gung-Ho's head, everybody else's head, and all the bodies. So I don't think that this is a final engineering pilot, but I do think that it is an engineering pilot set.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that Duke and Snake Eyes were final engineering pilots while the accompanying Gung-Ho wasn't, and it was just finished off to make it match the rest of the set. I can see that happening.
Yeah, and I will say also, the reason why I was looking so much at those tassels was to kind of prove that there was a paint mask used at all on these for people that are doubting that, because if you look at Agent Faces, the tassels on him have that same issue. Whereas there were Crimson Guards that came later, and they clearly had a lot that was cleaned up on them. The other area that people like to look at are the gloves, because the tightness of the silver ring of the cuff and the black of the hands, it's not real tight on these. But it's not that tight on Agent Faces either.
Yeah, I do remember them sort of being advertised concurrently, like he was like an unofficial fourth member of the set.
Yeah, for sure. That's certainly what it seems like. As a matter of fact, his specialty is Infiltrator, and this is the Infiltrate Cobra Island set. I should mention that these ones do have the COO on the feet, and the accessories, all of them, they all came with the Crimson Guard helmet, the Gung-Ho 1992 backpack, and Beachhead's rifle in black. But Gung-Ho and Snake Eyes had the Big Ben rifle, and Duke had the Firefly rifle in black. And then, of course, there were 2 oars that came with the set as well. But it almost felt like to make up for this, they kind of regrouped at Hasbro and made something even bigger for us, because we got Operation Crimson Sabotage, and it still came with 3 Crimson Guards, and it was a KB exclusive. The heads were new. It was a newly sculpted head for this set, and it cost $19.99. So for twice the price that we were going to pay, you subtract out the G.I. Joe aspect of things, subtract out the raft, but you were getting a Crimson Hiss Tank and a Crimson Asp, and that was awesome.
I should point out there is slight differences between these Crimson Guards and Agent Faces. First off, these Crimson Guards came with a little patch on their shoulder to match the Operation Crimson Sabotage patches. And also, their helmets had extra striping on the face mask portion of it.
The EP that I have here in front of me, it does not have that striping on those lines. So it matches Agent's Faces, as everything else does on this set. And then there was a set that came out in Toys R Us called the Crimson Guard Force.
The Crimson Guard Force Crimson Guard can be differentiated from the previous releases because they have the gold Cobra logo, a different colored rope braid, and also no shoulder patch.
Do you recall having to buy 2 of those?
Yeah, there were 2 different versions of it. One came with Tomax and one came with Zaymot, but both came with 4 Crimson Guards and the same Firefly. So no matter what if you want to be a completist, you had 2 of the same Firefly. That was a real sticking point back then.
Or the rumor that came out later was that the reason why Firefly was inserted into that set is that they originally wanted to include a Crimson Guard Immortal, but that the club was using that tooling on their Iron Grenadier Destro.
I could have substituted a Crimson Guard Commander and been equally happy.
Yeah, that might have been in South America at the time, though, right? I mean, they could have substituted another Crimson Guard, and I would have been happy.
Yeah. Oh, well.
And I think that it'd be fun to kind of end this whole... You know, we're looking into a little bit of history to give some answers, so why not generate more questions at the end of our video? One of the things that's always neat to look at on these Toys R Us sets is the art that they chose. And for sure, with Firefly, he probably was kind of just put in there as a late addition because they just used his Valor vs. Venom character art and put that in here, even though that is not the figure at all that was included.
Yeah, we saw that a few times in these Toys R Us packs, including the second pack that included Green Shirt Troopers.
The Heavy Assault Squad, yes.
Most of those figures in the art are wrong compared to what you got.
Yeah, I don't even think the file cards on that set are what are in the set either. Are they?
No, there's messed up file cards for sure. I think Ace is in there.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what was going to come out. I'd love to see the early designs of that set, but I have not. But the other interesting thing about this art is at the time, Draxall Jump, that was doing the art for Hasbro on these packages, had actually posted a bunch of the characters to their website. Here is what they called Crimson Guard 1, and here is what they called Crimson Guard 3. And these are just the ones from the package. It is interesting to see that they did have the gold logo. And then here's Crimson Guard 5. So we've skipped over Crimson Guard 4.
And 2.
Oh, yeah, and 2. I know G.I. Joe, but numbers are difficult.
Math.
Yeah, we have 1, 3, 5, and 6. The image on the package for Tomax and Xamot between the 2 packs was actually just the same picture reversed. But on their website, they just referred to him as Pinstripe. But that brings us to the question of who were Crimson Guards number 2 and 4? And I don't have a picture of Crimson Guard number 4 because they didn't post it. But they did post Crimson Guard number 2, and here it is.
Is that an eel?
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a mistake, but the eel never ended up coming out in red anyway. So this is super curious that they would have spent the time to do this art.
Yeah, I wonder if that was what was planned instead of Firefly. Is they're going to repaint an 85 eel in Crimson Guard colors and just call him an aquatic Crimson Guard.
Yeah, and I don't know where the tooling would have been for eel at that time. As far as I know, it was sent to Brazil, and I don't know that it ever made it back. I don't remember it ever making it over to Fun School, which was usually the last stop for tooling.
We also know around that time, Hasbro had trouble keeping track of what they had too, so it could have been that they just kind of painted themselves into a corner there.
Yeah, so there's a good possibility. I mean, it's interesting that it could be Crimson Guard number 4, or maybe this was going to be just somewhere else in the line. I really don't know. It's a nice mystery for us to end our episode on.
And isn't that what we're all about, is just making you more confused when we end it? All right, I guess that'll do it for us today. Hope you had as much fun as we did going into this. Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. And any other parting thoughts, Patrick?
No, thanks again, and enjoy Cobra Convergence. There's only a couple more days left. Thanks.
See ya.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.